Right, g'day everyone, welcome back to another video. You know, the beauty of living on such a time-pressed schedule is that you're having to cram in these videos to corners of your week and corners of your routine, which helps keep them concise, and you only have one take for all of these things, so let's hope it's a good one. I listened to a great podcast last week, and it was Matt Fradd's interview with Jason and Kristalina Everett, and they cover heaps of topics like around marriage and relationships, but there were some golden zingers in there which I really want to break down, because the most important point that Jason Everett introduced in that podcast is the role of the husband and father as the priest of the family. That I guess it's so easy to reduce fatherhood to this thing of purely physical, bearing of offspring and look after them till they turn 18. But I think the spiritual fatherhood, the priesthood of our role as men, not just in our families but towards other people, is very important to understand. And I think it helps us understand and get hints into what man's role under God truly is, because anyone can father a child. It's not rocket science to have a kid, but to really produce a man of God, to produce a saint, and to help build someone that contributes to society, I mean, that's a completely different thing. But the main quote that sort of led me to want to discuss this was that Jason Everett was talking to one of his mates, Devin Shrad or Sharat or something, and he said that the measure of a man's love for his wife is the extent to which he defends his interior life of prayer. That's how much he loves her. And I think the first point that this quote reveals is that marriage is not about you or your wife. It's about this ulterior mission, if you will, of both of your sanctity and the sanctity of your children. So when a man is measuring the love for his wife by how happy she is, by how happy he is, by how fulfilled he is, by any number of worldly metrics, you're all of a sudden missing a point. If the man's role is to get his wife to heaven and to get his children to heaven, then his highest priority is his interior life and the way in which that interior life, his spiritual life, flows onto his wife and children. To basically not focus on that is like cutting off the life of the family at the source. You could be the richest, you could be the strongest, you could be the most disciplined. But if you're not living a life of grace, you're actually missing the keystone, the cornerstone of your role as a father. So again, the vocation of marriage is not about you, it's about your spouse and children. So fatherhood is a priesthood, man as the spiritual leader, not the woman. I think this is a very important point as well, which flows on from this, is that because we're so quick to reduce masculinity and fatherhood to the physical, men will often ignore or forget about the spiritual. Women are more spiritual beings than men, in the sense that I think they can come to prayer more easily. For them, thinking about things of the heart and emotion and spirituality, it's sort of more in line with their nature. So I don't see it as something strange where you might have a family dynamic or family situation where the man might be in charge most of the time, but when it comes to like family prayer or when it comes to catechizing the children, maybe that's where the woman steps into that role and takes charge. But in reality, it's very much a thing that the man needs to do in terms of leading his family in that way. And there's a statistic that I think if the father practices the faith, the children are 90% likely to follow in the same footsteps or same faith profession as the father. But if it's the woman who practices and the man who doesn't, there's only like a 10% chance. So we know from statistics that this role model and guidance of the father is absolutely essential in the lives of faith and the children. But we also know from what you could say maybe like the laws of spiritual generation and grace is that these things flow. Like the grace that God gives us flows through the church and through the sacraments into our lives. Obviously, God can work outside that, but He's created this system and He's created these vocations and these sacraments to work in a certain way. And they work best when we follow the rules, so to speak. So when the Father's truly taking charge of that, He's leading the catechesis, He's leading the prayer, He's taking ownership of His responsibility as the spiritual defender of his family, the spiritual protector, the leader, the former. You know, that's, I guess, when we really see these things bear fruit. I mean, we look at examples of holy fathers in the tradition of the church, like Saint Louis Martin. I was reading this book or listening to a podcast, and they were going through, there's this popular liturgical book around that time by Dom Prosper Guéranger, which has like a reflection every day. And one of the things that I read said that the family, the Martin family, who had 3 saints in it, they would read this devotional book every single day of the year. So there's little things like that, that when the father is actually leading and taking charge of that, one of the things that Jason Everett talked about was that because he goes away to a lot of speaking engagements, he's often not even physically present at his household, but that his family would suffer a lot of spiritual attacks when he was away. And then he basically looked at himself at one of these points and said, well, what am I actually doing to quote unquote spiritually protect my family? Is like, am I not praying enough? Am I not fasting enough? And that's another important part of being a father, is you're the last line of defense between your family and the devil. Because if as a man you're abdicating that role and you're abdicating that responsibility, your wife isn't going to stand there. You know, she should have her own life of prayer, but she's also looking after the kids. It's not her vocation to do that. It is our vocation as men to be spiritual leaders. So that's very important for us not to forget. And I think to build on to that point, this is sort of the second half of what I wanted to discuss. Okay, we might have accepted the fact that the man should be the spiritual leader, but what are the stakes at hand here? The devil hates marriage and the family. Marriage, the union between a man and woman, which overflows into new life, it symbolizes and reflects so many of the attributes of God. It reflects the unity of God. It reflects the generosity of God. It reflects the providence and care of God for his children. The role of a mother and father in a way to their child is like the role of God to us, where they're taking care of them, they're forming them, they're loving them unconditionally. So in a family that sort of lives up to these ideals, lives up to these virtues, where a man and woman live up to these roles, in some ways it is the most holy and pure thing that exists on earth when done properly. So you can imagine when 2 people get married and they start having children, the devil wants to attack that and make sure that it never reaches what it actually needs to be. I mean, we only have to take a 1-second look at divorce to see how bad of a thing it is, not only for the man and woman who join together in what is supposedly meant to be a lifelong bond, which is then ripped apart through strife and conflict, but think about how badly that damages the children as well. You know, children that have mental wounds and scars, they'll turn to different sins or disorders, they'll legit get mental issues from this happening. And that's all because Satan, the deceiver and the divider, possibly through fault of the man and woman, of course, but when he's able to break apart that family unit, he can fully destroy the lives of everyone involved in that. So you have to keep that in mind as a single guy, as a single woman, as a married man, as a married woman, that there's so much dependent on your vocation. And it's so important for us to take that seriously. Now, I want to finish with a few quotes, I guess a few points about, again, what this means for us as men, because I've talked about that spiritual leadership, but more broadly, as men, we have this unique responsibility of giving ourselves, of giving our lives in service for others. So whether that means our body, our minds, our spirit, you know, all of these works that we do, whether physical or spiritual, works of prayer, works of charity, our life is meant to be given. You know, this is my body which is given up for you. That's our model that hangs on the cross. This is my body given up to you, given up for you. I gave my life for you. We're meant to emulate that in every aspect. We give it up in service of our family, our country, society, the church. From Familiaris Consortio, St. John Paul II, In the family, the man is called to live his gift and role as husband and father. In his love, he is called to reveal and relive on earth the very fatherhood of God. Our abnegation of this responsibility has a direct and immediate negative impact on the lives of those around us, both now and in the future. The fact that your life is not about you means that not just you are going to suffer the consequences of you not heeding this responsibility, but you not embracing responsibility of a man also affects the lives of your current spouse, of your future spouse if you're not yet married, of your children, of all the people around you. The more that you slip and ignore and fall behind as a man, the less that those people around you are going to benefit from the role and gifts and talents that God intended for you from the beginning of time. That's a huge mind switch that you have to make, that your life is not about you, and that means that it's important for you to work hard for the sake of others, not just for the fruits that it's going to bear for yourself. Now, I want to close with the example of the earthly father of Jesus Christ, Saint Joseph, terror of demons and protector of Holy Church. His laying down of his life every day for the Holy Family was what allowed our salvation to occur. If it had not been for the virtue and life of service which Saint Joseph lived, whether the way he acted around the Annunciation, the flight unto Egypt, the 30 years of providing for and raising the child Jesus, instilling in him virtues he would need later on, looking after our Blessed Mother, if he was not there to fulfill his role as a holy and obedient man of God, then the plan of salvation wouldn't have happened. Of course it did happen and God would have worked around that, but Saint Joseph in his manhood and in his fatherhood was an indispensable part of that plan. Pope Francis said in Patris Corde, Joseph was chosen to be the man through whom the mystery of salvation would be communicated to generations. His silence, his labor, and his fidelity made possible the incarnation's flourishing. So I think that's a beautiful metaphor for us to finish on, is that our lives of self-sacrifice, of obedience and virtue as men, we lay that down, and from which comes new life, whether that be in our children, whether that be in our spiritual children, whether that be in the church and society. We lay down, and from that new life begins. Saint Joseph laid his life down, and from that came the child Jesus through the Blessed Virgin Mary. So that's all I have for you guys today. Please check out that podcast with Jason Everett. It was very, very good. And I think we will do a podcast breaking down this vocation of manhood, specifically in the context of priesthood and fatherhood, because I think there's a lot here, especially in the sense that I think for majority of people listening to this podcast, in a lot of ways, our fathers, whether that be our physical fathers or the priests and mentors that we have had in our lives, they've not lived up to that fullness of that vocation. So I think that the more we talk about it and the more we look to our patrons such as Saint Joseph or other holy men from the past, it really allows us to fix this weak spot in our society. As men, society depends on us, the church depends on us, our family depends on us, the world depends on you. All right, God bless.